that either. But this is the pressure we're under, so that we're constantly having held up to us a standard of measurement that we don't believe in. We don't believe, as Reformed Christians, that issues of office and duty are in the first place pragmatic. We believe, in the first place, they are matters of divine appointment. How should the church be organized in terms of leadership? Well, you could probably write a very interesting book if you went around to some of the most successful evangelical congregations in America and asked how they're organized in terms of leadership. And probably most places what you would discover is that you have a charismatic preaching pastor, charismatic small c, a wower, somebody who can start every service with a joke and then holding up his Bible and say, "This is my Bible." I'm not picking on anybody in particular. But this is sort of universally true. What's necessary is that the man in the pulpit wow the people. That's the standard by which preaching increasingly is judged. And then probably that charismatic leader has a right-hand man who's the enforcer. Some CEO type who is really good at organization, really good at structure, really good at getting things going. And it's that pragmatic model that drives an awful lot of churches. We have a big Bible church in town. It's a good church in all sorts of ways. It's not as pragmatic as that model, but it's very interesting how they operate. They don't really entirely like people to become members, because then they have to take on some discipline. They're happier with people just attending. If you really want to be a member, you can be, but they never push that. Their notion of visitation is interesting. I had a very dear friend who, over several years, was dying of prostate cancer. He'd been a member of that church all his life. He'd been an elder in that church. He'd written the history of the church. He taught adult Sunday school in that church. And in the years he was dying, even though there were several pastors on the staff there, he never received a pastoral visit. And he never expected one. Pastoral, personal connection between the staff and the church is just conceived entirely differently. I was preaching at another kind of Bible church, and was standing outside the sanctuary waiting to go in, and the first part of the service was going to be led by the minister of visitation. So he and I were chatting, and this older gentleman walked by, and they waved at each other and said hello, and the pastor of visitation said, "Great to see you in church." And the other guy said, "Yes, and thanks so much for the phone call." And the man walked on, and the pastor of visitation turned to me and said, "Yeah, it really is good to see him in church. He just had open heart surgery." He had open heart surgery, and the church was big enough they had a pastor of visitation, and he'd gotten a phone call. I mean, this is shocking by Dutch Reformed standards. But this is the kind of church world we're living in, and part of the reason that this church world works is that so many church members are so individualistic that they're kind of glad to be left alone. One of my memories of my youth, I must have been maybe in junior high. I was raised in a Methodist family, but we never went to church. And I remember vividly the afternoon when I opened the door, and it was the Methodist minister at the door. And he said he'd come to call. And I went to the bottom of the stairs and called up, and I said to my mother, "Mother, the Methodist minister is here." And I remember her bellowing, "Oh, no!" And then I had to turn around and say, "She'll be right down." But I think that's a very common American attitude, that The pragmatic approach works great. The ministers do their own thing and largely leave me alone, and I do my own thing. And nobody's really checking up on me. I enjoy the anonymity of the big church because they don't know whether I'm there or not. And I get what I want out of it. I pick and choose. And I remember, this won't all be stories, but I'm getting old, so I tell stories. I remember coming back from a Ligonier conference and sitting in the airport in Orlando, and a young man coming up to me, and he said, "You were at the conference?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, that's great, because I'm URC too. I belong to the Anaheim URC." I said, "That's great. Tell me, how did you come to get there?" He hadn't been there very long. I said, "What was the thing that most impressed you the first time you came to a Reformed church?" What do you think? What most impressed you? He'd been part of a huge megachurch, kind of charismatic megachurch. He said, "The thing that most impressed me was that the minister shook hands at the door after the service." He went to a church where 21,000 people attended Sunday morning. They had 3 services, 7,000 people in each service. The senior pastor arrived on campus, as he put it, after the first service started, and left the campus before the 3rd service ended. Now, you can understand, there's no way any human being could shake 21,000 hands. But no one expected they would have any contact with the senior pastor. This young man had been on staff at the church. I said, "How many were there on staff?" He said, 56. Now, I don't know exactly who all that included, but there were 56 paid people on staff. He said, "As a staff member, I was never introduced to the senior pastor."